You're listening to Just Medicine, an equity in healthcare podcast created by medical students in British Columbia.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Just Medicine podcast. My name is Kennedy Graham, and I'm a medical student at the University of British Columbia. I'm excited to bring you the fourth and final episode in our series together on diet and food access, the gut microbiome, and the health of Indigenous communities in British Columbia. Over the last 3 episodes, we've explored how diet and food systems are deeply intertwined with health, culture, and equity. In our first episode, I spoke with Jessie Newman, an Indigenous health dietitian, about the history of food insecurity in Indigenous communities. We unpacked how colonial policies disrupted traditional food systems, severed intergenerational knowledge, and disproportionately affected Indigenous health. Jessie also introduced the concept of food sovereignty, the power of communities to reclaim their food systems for sustainable, culturally appropriate diets. Then in the second episode, we shifted focus to the science of the gut microbiome with Dr. Estelle Knapp-Hill, a gastroenterology fellow in Vancouver. Dr. Knapp-Hill illuminated how our microbiomes are shaped by diet and lifestyle, and why traditional diets tend to promote gut health in ways westernized diets often fail to replicate. We also discussed how healthcare providers can foster culturally safe environments to address these complex issues respectfully and effectively. Finally, in our third episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Dr. Morgan Lindsay, a family physician in British Columbia. Dr. Lindsay emphasized the importance of representation in the healthcare profession and how addressing the social determinants of health as a family physician can transform care for underserved populations. She reminded us that healing comes not only from medicine, but from rebuilding the relationships that colonization have fractured. Today's episode ties it all together as we reflect on the interconnected themes of food, health, and culture in a second conversation with Jessie Newman. In our conversation, Jessie discusses several projects that she's launched and what strategies she's found to be successful. She then shares actionable steps listeners can take to advocate for food sovereignty, support Indigenous health, and incorporate these lessons into their practice or daily lives. Whether you've been with us from the start or you're just tuning in, this episode is a call to action and a reminder that equity in healthcare begins with understanding and ends with advocacy. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right, so today we're welcoming back Jessie Newman. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with her for our first episode in the podcast series. We discussed how access to and consuming traditional foods and being connected to the land is incredibly important to Indigenous folks' health, identity, and community building. We also looked at the historical context of colonization and how that has impacted diet in many Indigenous communities today. What we want to build on in our conversation now is Jessie's unique role within the Indigenous health portfolio at Island Health in the north of Vancouver Island. In our last episode together, she described her role as being a 50-50 split of public health and community work. I'm looking forward to exploring her roles and firsthand experiences more, as well as learning lessons from her about the importance of relationship building in health settings and how to move forward to make change and advocate for Indigenous folks across British Columbia. So without further ado, welcome, Jessie. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So to start us off, could you tell us, Jessie, about the roles you've held since becoming a dietitian, working in Skidegate to working in Kwakwaka'wakw?
Right. So my first position straight out of university was in my home community of Skidegate at our health center. I remember always knowing that I would go back there, but never really discussing it, like just thinking that it would happen. And reaching out to the health director at the time, her name is Lauren Brown, and she instantly said she would take me on, created a position for me. And so that role was very much, I would say, community-based, just in the local Skidegate area and one town over. But working predominantly with Haida people from Skidegate, and working in schools and seeing clients one-on-one about diabetes care, and then eventually creating a diabetes group as well. And so it was a lot more intimate, I would say, than the job that I have now. And so I was able to create like really strong relationships with the other employees as well as the community in general. And then after 3 years, I took on my current role, which is Indigenous Health Dietitian with Island Health. And it's working with, I believe, 20 communities on Northern Vancouver Island. So it's much broader, I would say. I feel like I kind of have to do everything, although I don't see clients one-on-one. So it is a bit of a public health role where I am working provincially with other health authorities and other dietitians within those health authorities, but also working in communities, so in schools, in health centers. And I love that I get to be on the front lines, but then like also working in policy provincially. So it's been a really amazing learning opportunity, and lots of challenges along the way as well, which I think is important. So they're completely different, but there are some similarities, and I enjoy them both.
Totally. I'm curious, when you were working in Skidegate, what the experience was like working with people that you may have grown up with or known previously to holding the role that you had.
I would say overall it was very positive. I would say the majority of the community was super receptive to me coming in, like very excited. I remember that my the first, I guess, project that I took on was trying to create some sort of diabetes plan within communities. So we did an initial engagement dinner, asking community what they were interested in, what they felt like a diabetes program should look like in community, where should the focus be. We had a focus group with elders. We put together a survey. Like we really wanted to know what the community would like to focus on. And so I think that was really important, straight away, that we were really taking the input and creating something based on what they would like to see. And just knowing that I grew up in community, that's where I'm from, like I had this understanding of our culture and our foods, that was definitely important. And so I think I felt like it would only be positive. But I definitely did have some challenges where there were some people who, especially like some family members, like actually chose not to see me. And I think it's because like there was such a closeness that I think some people don't want to see somebody too close to them and would prefer to see another healthcare professional about their issues. And everybody's different. Like many family members wanted to see me, but some didn't, and I had to respect that. And I understood definitely, but like it was still a little bit weird, I would say. But overall, it was a completely positive experience working within community, and I felt like I really built something up. I was really proud of the work that I did, and bringing people together in community that might not have come together outside of this program, creating safe spaces and people not feeling alone in their diabetes. And so I'm totally proud of what we did what we did in Skidegate, and overall it was amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. It sounds like you were able to make those connections with people in your community yourself, but also facilitate those connections between other people. And I think that's equally as important, especially considering how now you've transitioned out of that role into something different, but you've left behind this legacy of the community feeling more connected within themselves. So that was the diabetes care program, Good Ad Quagit.
And that means stronger together. And so that was termed by the group. I remember I was thinking we should name this. Like it's just come so far. I feel like we need to put a name to it. And so I asked the group, and I wanted it to be in the Haida language. I felt like that was really important. And so one of the elders said, "What about good odd quagid and stronger together?" I was like, yes, because I personally think I don't have diabetes, but I have heard from people who have diabetes that they can feel quite alone. And it's so difficult, especially if none of their family members or people living in their households have diabetes. So they just feel like they're not fully understood. But when this group came together, just knowing that they all are going through, suffering through the same condition, I feel like they felt so much more understood and not alone and definitely stronger together. And so I loved it. And yeah, I don't think that the group actually meets anymore, which is really unfortunate. But I'm so happy with what we did. I hope one day that I can go back and reconvene the group.
For sure. And so after you worked on that project, you also started the Knowledge Keepers project, and that was in Kwakwakiwak. Could you tell us a little bit more about that project as well?
Right. Yeah. So it's a bit of a story. It started during COVID. A lot of the communities were experiencing shortages in food and community and having difficulties through the supply chain. Everybody was. Grocery store shelves were empty. Food security was now kind of top of the list of all nations issues. And at the time, our Indigenous health program had a bit of extra money, and they wanted to know what we felt the priority was. And at the time, I was working by myself. We do have two Indigenous health dietitians in our program, but one of them was vacant at the time. And so I had seen other programs throughout the province, seen some communities doing really well, knew that it had to do with having somebody in community, a champion who was really at the forefront of food security or food sovereignty, and they were getting paid to do so. I've seen in some communities that people are doing it on the side of their desks. It doesn't gain momentum. And so I said, well, we've got this extra money. I've got this extra other pot of money from another program. Like, what if we just pilot a program in our communities where we pay somebody, we pay a knowledge holder to do this food work? And so there were two communities that were chosen. I remember it was very last second too, like they just had to get the money out the door at the end of the fiscal, like which always happens. And so we quickly had to find two communities. One was Kwakwakiwak and one was New Chalmette, actually. But we found two amazing people to do the work. And they chose to go in two totally different directions, which is fine. Like, it's their community. They each have their own priorities and difficulties. And so one chose to create a garden and focus on that and hire somebody to work towards that and like creating a greenhouse. And then the other community chose to focus a bit more on cultural mentorship. And so really working with kids in high school and taking them out on out on the land, a few food-based trips each year. Some of them got their firearms license to go hunting. And it was amazing to see what a small amount of money could do, because it wasn't a lot. I think it might have been like $30,000 or $40,000 in the end that each of these positions received, but it's been about 3 years now. And just to see how both of them have grown over that time is really exciting. And then we work towards getting like other funds from different grants to keep the programs going. But I think it's really important to have programs like this because so often like the funding is like just for a year. And then it's like, how can you keep things going after that? But we're still in the development process of this, how we want to see it over the long term. But I'm pretty proud of it. And I love that there wasn't really a strong application phase or a reporting requirement as well. It's more like just having conversations with me, because I think that is definitely a huge barrier for nations, in that sometimes they don't know about these grants, like they don't have the time to put together a strong application. And then the reporting requirements can be really intense sometimes. And so I feel like everything is on their terms pretty much. Like, how do you want to report? How often do you want to talk? Like, do you want to just send me photos? And so I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible and like trusting that the work is being done. And then Island Health is trusting that I'm managing the program well, which I think is nice. Like, we're all just trusting each other, which I think is really important in this work.
Yeah, totally. I guess the value of this approach is even demonstrated by the fact that each knowledge keeper has taken their project into different directions, but the directions they've chosen will specifically and directly benefit their unique community.
Yeah, like there's no strong guidelines. It's just do what you want, basically, and I'll follow along. And yeah, they're all and it's shown like it's successful. It's everything has been very positive so far. Well, mostly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess it's even evidenced by the fact that each of the individuals that you kind of appointed as the champions of this food sovereignty work in those two different communities, taking things in two completely different directions. But I can imagine those are directions that each of their communities needed and was the most specific to.
Right. And then actually recently there's been a third position that's been created, maybe a year ago. And so this knowledge holder is amazing. And she's been working with a dietitian that works out of Tofino with the New Trauma Tribal Council. And so they've created like a whole series based on traditional foods and diabetes and weaving the two together. And they even created a video based on what they've done. And they're a powerhouse duo. And so I'm super stoked on that one. And I worked with both of them on the Indigenous Foods Gathering, which we hosted in Port Alberni in March, which was a huge success. But it's creating like networks all over the island, I would say, this work. We all kind of know each other, and it's creating a sense of community, which is nice.
Definitely. I'm wondering, does that exist on the mainland as well, or is that unique, that network on the island?
I think it is a bit unique, but I think it's growing provincially, because there are now some gatherings being hosted in the interior. Like Interior Health is funding nations to gather, and they've been called the food forums, and I think they've hosted two over the past few years. And they're also working with the working group on Indigenous food sovereignty. And so we actually worked with one of their members on our gathering, which was nice. And then I know Northern Health is also wanting to like create a gathering. And so Interior Health and Island Health are working with them. So there's a little network. And then I think people higher up are seeing that there's just this appetite for this and how important it is. And so now I know that there is an RFP being offered by the Ministry of Agriculture to host a provincial gathering. So, which everybody's been asking for. Like, everybody loves to gather. Like, it's so important for building relationships and networks.
It is, yeah. I'm so glad to hear that Island Health is setting an example for other health authorities to come together and meet.
Yeah, there's so much momentum. It's a very exciting time right now.
Definitely. Um, I wanted to sort of pivot and have a bit of a conversation about your observations, having worked in a variety of communities when it comes to changing diets and its impact on health status. I'm wondering, you've spoken about diabetes, but are there other health conditions or chronic illnesses that you've seen firsthand in the Indigenous communities you've worked with that disproportionately affect these communities?
Um, Definitely. I've seen gut issues a lot, which I think has to do with sometimes trauma in childhood. And so I almost feel I could link everything back to residential school. So I see that arthritis as well, linked to trauma in childhood. But other conditions like kind of secondary to diabetes, kidney disease, heart disease, obesity, of course. Um, so there are all of these conditions, and I do think it is diet related, of course, but if we look at the bigger picture, like it's definitely not just diet. Like it's more societal, it's systemic, and it can all be stemmed back to colonization.
Right. And that was something we talked about in our first episode together. So if listeners want to double back and check out that episode, they can delve into that a little bit more in a bit more depth. Now, when you do encounter challenges or failures in your roles, say a project proposal is critiqued or a patient is struggling to meet a dietary plan you've created for them, how do you persist and keep moving forward?
Um, so I have had some challenges within this program, the Knowledge Holders program, and it has a little bit more to do with like I guess the structure of our system and how it is not managed by our program, but our Healthy Communities program. And so I feel like there's just a lack of understanding of like our culture and our way of doing things sometimes, which I have to advocate for. It continues to be an issue right now. So I continue to discuss this like with my manager and my director of how we can move forward. And I think we're going to get there. I've definitely been frustrated many times because sometimes these slowdowns can really affect how quickly the money can get out into communities sometimes, like that, like contracts and money tends to be an issue, and just how slow things can be within health authorities and working in government sometimes. So that's a challenge. And then working within community, I would say it's just been such a learning experience for me. I mean, people go through so much. Like I can go in with like some sort of nutrition plan or like ideas, but then I listen to people and they're experiencing so many challenges and so many things that I'm not even thinking of, that I'm not experiencing at that time. And I'm like, okay, you're really just doing the best that you can. And I'm really impressed that you're of what you're doing so far. So just trying to be like a bit more reassuring, because people go through so much and sometimes food isn't at the top of their agenda, and time. Like I was just in community the other day, and I was like, wow, I did not know that you were going through all of this. Like these were mothers with young children, and all of the struggles that they were facing, things that like I couldn't imagine. And I was like, well, if you can sit down and have a meal like with your kids like a few times a week, like that can go a long way. So if you don't have the time to plan, if you don't have the best food to offer your child, if you can just sit down and like have that meal together, like that's going to be huge. And just trying to be the best role model that you can, because there's so much that you can't control. So I think just like trying to listen as much as possible to like the challenges that people are facing, and just trying to be a bit reassuring, because I think sometimes healthcare professionals can really like push and tell people that they're not doing things the right way, I guess, or following guidelines. But people are just trying to do the best that they can. And life is difficult sometimes.
And everybody's going through something different, and you're not necessarily going to know what
Mm-hmm.
they're going through without asking
Mm-hmm.
and without listening to their response. I actually think that's the perfect segue into our next grouping of questions about the importance of relationship um, in the work that health professionals do. Having spoken to you, of course, Dr. Estelle Knapp-Hill and Dr. Morgan Lindsay, a common sentiment that each of you has shared is that it's crucial to be aware of the human being sitting in front of you and the context within which that human being exists. And of course, in order to be aware of a patient and their health holistically, there has to be a trusting relationship between the patient and the health professional. Just from all of our conversation together, from the sounds of it, you're incredibly skilled at building relationships with patients and with colleagues. And I can imagine that that's been hugely important to your success so far in your work. So I wanted to dive a bit deeper into that with you. Maybe to start off, could you talk a bit about whether your approach to building relationships with patients has changed over the course of your career, and maybe with those changes, the lessons that you've learned in building healthy and strong bonds with patients?
I'm not so sure that it has, but let me like, in both of my roles, I've always had a lot of time to be with people. Like there's never been any time restrictions imposed on me, which feels quite luxurious. Like I can spend as much or as little time. Like if I'm in community, I'm here until like all of the questions are done. But what's always been important to me in my work is that the first thing I do when I meet somebody, or if I'm giving a presentation, is really to tell them who I am, where I'm from. And it's really important to me that people know why I do what I do. And so I think it's really important to give like a thorough introduction, especially if I'm giving a presentation, and then giving people the opportunity to do the same. Because to me, like it doesn't feel appropriate to give a presentation, to hold space with people without doing that. And that always creates a connection, because then we see like our, we have similar ancestors or family members, and that always feels really special, because I feel like in this position, I'm always meeting like new relations and family ties that I had no idea about, which I think is important. And I think just personally, like I'm a very open person. Like I'm not scared of being vulnerable. I think that's important in a relationship. And I guess really trying to be like reciprocal, like always showing up, responding to issues in a timely manner. And I think that builds trust. But of course, it's always been easier for me just being Indigenous and from the lands in which I work. And so yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like I've always had a similar approach. It's just kind of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel like I deprofessionalize every space that I'm in. I think it's, yeah, I've just always been a very open person. And so I've always had a pretty a pretty easy time building relationships with people, which is, and I've always known the importance of it. Like, just it was one of our strongest values growing up. Like, relationships are important within community, and now even more than ever in my work, I have so many connections, so many people, like, within my all of the networks that I work in, and it's constantly building. And so, yeah, and it's so important. I can't I can't stress it enough, like, just how important it is to have that network. Like, I have a provincial networks, but also like along the coast, and then within Vancouver Island, and within this little area that I work within, Campbell River and Lake Comox in the North Island. So yeah, I'm not sure if I have any lessons to share, but I think it really is, I think you need to be quite open, and willing to put in that time with people and listen. And I think that's how trust develops and how relationships form.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you say you don't have any lessons to share, I had to laugh because I feel like you've shared so much. And I think it's not just about telling someone how they should act, but actually being a role model. Even from the few conversations I've had with you, I can really sense your openness and sense how you've deprofessionalized the conversation. And I've actually really personally appreciated that because I think it allows me to then be myself, open up, and feel safe doing so.
Hey. That
Yeah,
feels okay. That feels really good, because it's just like what I do. So it's hard to put it into words sometimes.
totally. Yeah, it's just who you are. And like I think um I think you've shown in our conversations being yourself is the first step to doing all of that, is just being comfortable with who you are and showing your true colors, which then opens up that opportunity for somebody else to do the same.
Nice. Okay.
Um, I guess my last question when it comes to the relationship building, specifically in your work, I was wondering if you could discuss the roles of storytelling, um, and you've sort of spoken to trust and time. So maybe we'll just stick with storytelling in building relationship with the Indigenous clients that you support.
I would say I tend to use it. I don't know if it's like a lot, but I definitely do tell stories of other clients that I work with when I'm speaking with people. No names, of course, but definitely speaking of how other people have dealt with their diabetes, other people's journeys, because I think if people, especially if they're people like them, if they can relate a little bit to what somebody else like them has gone through, then it's, I think they believe it's more likely that it can happen for them. So I've definitely brought in people to speak to groups who have diabetes, to tell their stories, because I think it makes it much more meaningful to them. Um, so yeah, if I can, I think it's really important to include the stories of other people living with diabetes, because I don't live with diabetes. Like, I don't know everything that they're going through. Like, they're dealing with this like their entire day. Like, they might be thinking about this and making so many decisions about this. But if I can somehow like weave in something from somebody else dealing with the condition, I think it just makes it so much more relatable and approachable and possible for people. So I definitely do try to do this within my work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess that it would be more relatable, and even the things that you're recommending as a dietitian might become more
Mm-hmm.
understandable because you can point to another human being and go, okay, well, they were able to follow that plan, or when they were implementing that plan, what did it look like? As opposed to just, this is a medical recommendation, and
Mm-hmm.
how does this apply to me specifically?
Exactly. And I almost, as I am practicing longer, like now it's been 9 years, like as healthcare professionals, we have all these guidelines and these recommendations, but the people living with these conditions are are really the experts of their own body. And I almost feel like their peers who are dealing with these conditions are almost better teachers than I could be, because they have they just understand, like they can relate, they can empathize. Whereas like it's almost like I feel like less of the healthcare professional as I am on this journey, and I'm just there to listen a bit more, I think, and really try to understand.
And to bring people together for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for talking that through with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. To wrap up our episode, just in the interest of time, as well as to wrap up the podcast series, I thought we could touch on how to move forward to make change and advocate for the health of Indigenous communities, specifically when it comes to food sovereignty, diet, and the health of the gut microbiome. A lot of our listeners are probably individuals that are interested in advocacy work and want to learn more. So I was wondering if there is a book, podcast, or other resource that you would suggest for trainees interested in learning more about what we've touched upon in our podcast episodes together.
I do actually. So my friend Rachel Dickens has her own website, and you should definitely check it out. And she has a section called Indigenous Resources, and it's almost like literally a course filled with videos and book recommendations. I was just looking through it yesterday and I was like, this is amazing. Like articles, there's colonization, cultural safety, like just so much. But I would say I think it's important that people know that like they make up these systems, and they can, they're the one, people make up systems and they're making the decisions, and we really do have the power to create change, like just through that. And we can create change. And so I would say like just within your everyday life or within your job, I think it's possible to create change and to make a better healthcare system for everyone and Indigenous people. And I think it's important that people know the history of the lands that they live on, and that can easily be done by going online. And every nation pretty much has a website, and you can learn a little bit of the language and the history of the lands, because that history is the explanation of the current situation that we're in. So I think that's a really good place to start.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for those recommendations, and thank you so much for everything you've shared over the course of today's episode and the last episode that we recorded together. Again, for listeners, if you're interested in learning more, do refer to our other podcast episode together. And otherwise, thank you so much, Jessie, for today, and wishing you all the best.
Oh, thanks, Kennedy. Thanks for having me, Hella.